Yeah, we already said it.
So we started?
No, it's already been, he knows. He's hooking that up.
Alright, just come check in a second.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. As we wait a couple more minutes to get started, I'm going to go through a number of different items today, and feel free to ask me any question throughout the entire process. There are some labs that we're going to be doing, which are just theoretical stuff that you can do in your head that you think through. So you're not going to necessarily need your computer for it. It would be nice to have your computer, because most of the tools that we'll be going over, you can visit the site and take a look at their site, kind of poke through stuff to see what it actually is and what it does. Okay, so to get us started, this is welcome to Advanced Threat Hunting. I hope everyone's had a great conference so far. A little bit about me. My name is Joe DePlato. I've been doing IT things my entire life. Examples: I got suspended from school, middle school in 8th grade for hacking the computer system there. It was just an easy brute force attack against the systems, and once we got in, so myself and one of my good friends, we just decided to give everybody games. So usually desktops were locked down essentially, and I'm dating myself here. When I say games, I mean games such as Oregon Trail and Pinball that you had on older Windows NT machines, 95 machines. That's not what I got in trouble for. So that was cool. What I ended up getting in trouble for is the system was not designed to have everybody logged on at the same time doing things. So once we essentially sold the games to the student base, everyone logged on. At one point, the system crashed. This was back in the day before people had backups, redundancy, disaster recovery. So when the system came back online, or they got the system back online, the library database that monitored who had what checked out was compromised, or not compromised, was destroyed. So anyone who had a book checked out, they lost all those textbooks.
So currently performed a denial of service attack.
Yes. So my brute force attack on cracking their password ended up being a denial of service attack against their library system, which was a huge issue. Again, my parents were not very happy about this, but it kind of set me on the path of we should understand systems that we're playing with prior to attacking them or attempting to attack them, because there are other consequences that you might not be aware of. Following that, AOL called my house. For those of you who don't know, AOL is America Online. Back in the day, you had to dial into the internet to actually access it, and I was doing some cool stuff with them. So got on the right path. I worked for a military contractor for a number of years, securing their data centers. So I spent some time over in the Middle East, as well as Europe, helping that company set up data centers and secure those data centers. My wife and I got sick of being over in the Middle East, so we came back here, and I worked for a company called Palantir. For those of you who are not familiar with Palantir, they are a large data analytics company. They're a Silicon Valley company started by the same founders who started PayPal, and they do a lot of military contracting work. I worked for their commercial cyber side, so my role with them was to go into Fortune 10 companies. Specifically, I supported BP, Home Depot, and American Express. I would go into their security operations centers and install Palantir's tool, start grabbing all the data that we could, and then showing those analysts how to interpret that data. So what to do with the data sets they have access to, and how to essentially find evil on their network. Presently, I do a number of things. I work for an educational nonprofit, helping support their mission of bringing online educations to K through 12, and then I help startups. So essentially, any startup that cannot afford cybersecurity people, I'll go in and I will assist them setting up some decent architecture and at least getting some infrastructure in place for them so that they can better handle attacks against their systems. So the schedule for today, I figured the best way to do this was to start with open source tooling, so building the architecture. the majority of organizations that we go into, and the reason that I switched from Palantir to helping smaller businesses was what I discovered with Palantir and those Fortune 10 companies is they have the budgets and they have the expertise and the people to secure their systems and to be pretty decent at detecting when there's anomalous activity on their networks. Fortune 10 companies are 10 companies. Fortune 100, there's just 100 companies. There's, as of 2014, 5.7 million small businesses in the U.S., and none of them have the budgets or the expertise to secure their systems and protect their data. And if and when they're breached, they can't support the fines. So usually they'll go out of business because it's too much of an either reputational damage or some type of violation that the state or local or federal government will impose upon them. So I decided to go that route and support those businesses. To date, what I've seen, and I'll try to hit on this throughout, is security best practices are still a thing. Every breach that I've done in the state of Virginia this year has either been RDP exposed to the world and it was brute forced without multi-factor, VNC exposed to the world and it was brute forced without multi-factor, or they fell for a credential harvester because their user population just didn't have any type of training or any type of know-how or what to do once they have their credentials compromised, and then they've just leveraged those user credentials to move laterally throughout the network and do fun things. So understanding all that, I figure we'll start with open source tooling, go through those tools so you can kind of get a readout of what I use in day-to-day throughout my job. Then we could go into what's called the F3EA hunting framework. So it's a framework that I leverage and I teach other SOC analysts to use when approaching investigations and approaching the data that the organization is sending to them. We're going to hit threat hunting, so the process and indicators of detecting a compromise on a network. And then if we have time, Suricata basics and creating a network intrusion detection sensor from a Raspberry Pi. On that last note, it seems cheap, but I've deployed to date probably about 150 Raspberry Pis for $35 that I simply use Raspbian OS on, and I'm running Suricata, and that's syncing back to either a local SIM, local log aggregator, syncing up to AWS. And that's been able to support up to about 500 endpoints on a network, depending on how much bandwidth you're getting throughout that network. So you can do stuff. I don't want to say on the cheap, but you can do stuff cheaply that can get you the visibility that you need to detect threats on a network. Okay, so starting off, we're going to go, well, any questions up to this point from anybody? Great. So starting off, we're going to go with OSINT tools. So I have a number of items we're going to cover. What can we leverage to assist in an investigation? How can we trust the data we are seeing? Where can we find these tools? And how can we incorporate them into our processes? So because we're going to processes second after all the OSINT tools, just put a note in that one and you can see how we can incorporate those. So let's get started. So the first tool that I like to use is Browserling. What this allows you to do, and I'll throw it up on the screen for those that don't have laptops, what this allows you to do is it's a live session of a website that allows you to anonymously view what exactly is going on that site. So workflow here, think phishing. So someone submitted a phish to you and it has a link. So you need to do some type of link-based analysis. You want to see what's going on at the other end of that site, but you don't want to be compromised yourself, nor do you want to expose your IP address to that site. There are virtual machines that individuals can run. I use Tails that route your traffic through Tor. Some people, I know BP, for example, they actually have an entirely separate network that's running virtual machines that they can connect and run those indicators through and visit those sites so that there's no attribution back to them. But if you don't have the architecture and if you can't afford to build out an entire stack that's dedicated to doing these investigations, BrowserLing is a great way and a great place to start. I'll show you what that looks like. This is BrowserLing. Very easy. It's live, interactive. You know, it's designed for cross-browser testing, but you're able to leverage this to visit sites. So let's go to Facebook. Usually, so this is free up to a certain amount. You can buy a developer plan, which is relatively inexpensive. I think it's like $259 for up to 5 licenses for 5 users. But what this does is this opens it up in Internet Explorer, running on a Windows 7 machine, I believe, and then displays the site for you in this virtualized window. So,
.com.
Yeah, that's right. Internet 101. So there's no attribution back to you. So it's not going to pull the IP address of this machine. I'm actually connected to my hotspot. It's not going to pull the IP address of this machine, and it allows you to view what's going on that site. Now, you're not going to be able to download any payloads if there's a payload there, but so far in my experience to date, in the last year at least, everything's been a Credential Harvester, because that's all we're going for. So it will show you if it's a Credential Harvester. And has anyone, by show of hands, seen a Credential Harvester? Like what one looks like? Okay, so it literally looks like the Office 365 login page or the Gmail login page. So
Click your choice.
Yeah, to a user that doesn't understand that, so just a simple user that's non-technical, they're not gonna identify the URL. They're not gonna look any of that. They're gonna see an Office 365 logo, and then they're gonna log in and say, okay, here's my credentials. They're also smart about that, the attackers. So what they'll do is, once the user enters their credentials, they actually redirect them to Office 365. And the user either logs in or gets a password incorrect, in which case they type their password again, and now they're in. And they are none the wiser. They don't know that their credentials were stolen. So again, that tool is BrowserLing, and that's a great tool for visiting the sites. So. Real quick, Open Source Lab 1. Let's spend like a minute, come up with 3 use cases for BrowserLing, how you leverage that tool, and restrictions. Let's not do restrictions. So take a minute, think about 3 use cases, and think about how you leverage this tool, and then shout them out once you come up with something.
Have you used the API before?
I have not, no. Has anyone used their API? Yeah, so for the most part, the investigations and the SOCs that I've trained have been low volume, I guess is the best way to describe it, where they're only leveraging that, I would say, a handful of times per day. I think BrowserLing has a restriction of 20 or 25 visits before they're going to block you and say, hey, you need to purchase this tool. But if you're doing that type of volume on a daily basis, it's probably worth it to purchase the tool or find a better solution.
So it's like 25 a day?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's around there. Okay, so use cases.
Bypass your internal restrictions.
Yep, correct. So from a school perspective, students do that. They could visit this site if it's not restricted, and then they can bypass any type of restrictions that are on your network. So you technically can stream stuff from there. There's a lot that you can do from that.
3 minutes worth?
So it's 3 minutes on the free version. If you pay for it, it's unlimited.
Yeah, I looked it up. Thursday or Friday is $20 a month.
$20 a month?
Yeah, one.
All right, for one license. So that's inexpensive. Okay, so moving on. Next thing we have is Alienvault's Open Threat Exchange. So this is going to have threat intelligence reports. It's crowdsourced, plus they do have a local team who does a decent job, and they do decent threat intel write-ups. What Alienvault does, they also have a SIM, which we'll get to later, but their Open Threat Exchange is great for running indicators. So if you have any type of IP address, domain, or hash that you've discovered on your network, you can go to otx.alienvault.com. The accounts are free to set up, and you have unlimited access to run queries. They do also have an API that they'll give you an API key for. That's also free, and you can have near unlimited queries. I'll show you what that looks like. So I am already logged into Alienvault. And you can see just by logging in, here's 1 day ago. This was created by the Alienvault team. There's a new PowerShell-based backdoor found in Turkey. Strikingly similar to the Muddy Water tools. If we click into that, it's going to give you those indicators. Those are indicators that if you do not have access to their API, you do not have any type of threat intelligence feed, you can run against your network to see if anything is popping up in your network that's related to those indicators. My recommendation, though, is just to leverage their API and pipe that into whatever aggregator or SIM that you're leveraging, and then alert based on that. So for Lab 2, what I want you to do is just go to otx.alienvault.com, pull it up in your browser, and just familiarize yourself with the site for a bit. Later, I do have some indicators that we can run to see what they actually come back with. All right, number 3 is the Ibm X-Force Tool. So again, it is threat intelligence. So this is what you can leverage to run indicators, IPs, domains, etc. It's paid, but it's free to browse, so you can query and you can pull back reports. In my experience, I leverage both of them when I'm running indicators because they each have different pieces of intel. Alienvault tends to be more crowdsourced, where any of us, when we find something, we can submit that to the Open Threat Exchange, and then they will have a pulse, or it'll at least be searchable in their database. IBM tends to be a little bit more stringent about what indicators they are showing, so it's typically based on their team, or at least vetted by their team prior to going out there, or prior to being populated in their thing. What I've discovered is their write-ups are far more in-depth and informative than Alienvault's, but Alienvault's give me a lot more hits than IBM's X-Force does, and purely because they're a little bit more stringent on that. So later what we'll do is open up X-Force, familiarize yourself with the site, and then run some indicators that I'll put up on the screen against both systems to see if they've matched up. By a show of hands, who's used X-Force before? Okay, so a small number of you. Who's used Alienvault's OTX before? Okay, so more so. So this next one is something, or one that people should be familiar with. And if you're not, definitely familiarize yourself with it. It's VirusTotal. It's file and URL analysis. It's paid, again, but free to browse. It's free to submit stuff. You can run files and URLs against their engine, which will turn back a certain number of hits, and I'll show you what that looks like. So from a process perspective, what we're looking for here is we've received a URL, we've received a file, and we have no idea if it's malicious or not. So what do? Let's come here, let me look at Facebook again. And what this is going to do, this is going to run it against 66 different engines and let you know if the URL is clean or not. It does the same thing with files. It runs them against a number of different engines and then comes back with if that file was clean or not. Now, whether or not you trust the engines or whether or not they're doing some type of evasion, you're going to still have to make that call based on a number of other factors. But at least this gives you some indication as to what the community feels and what all these other antivirus vendors feel the file or URL is. Pulling up the details tab, it gets you a little bit more info on this. So you're going to have your IP addresses, categories, etc. And then usually there's nothing in the community tab, which gets a little bit annoying, but in this case there is. So a lot of, there's some people that have posted stuff. Tracks your data, collects personal data, too addictive. I think we'd all agree that that's Facebook. But yeah, so don't expect community stuff here. It's very, in my experience with the stuff that I've come across for the SMB market, it's very rare that we've been able to discover something that's here. Again, so for that next, and we can come back to this, but sign up for a VirusTotal account, familiarize yourself with the file, upload a file, scan the URL. One thing to note, and one thing I don't think I've hit on yet, are what are the privacy concerns?
That if you have an account, you can download other things that people have uploaded.
Correct.
So if it's something with, interesting data, it's now public interesting data.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is scanned regularly by lots of places.
Mm-hmm. So if you accidentally, let's say, upload, a file that your organization is working on, that IP is now out there for anyone else to scan. If that file, if that XE has, hard-coded usernames or passwords, or which is oftentimes the case, that's going to be searchable once you download it from their API. So it's a great tool, but you have to be aware of what you're actually uploading. The other thing the other thing to think about is if this threat actor is specifically targeting your organization, they'll probably be monitoring VirusTotal to see if the piece of malware they made for your organization is uploaded, and that's an indicator to them that they need to start changing their tactics because you're onto them. So the next one is hybrid analysis. Again, this is file URL analysis again. It's similar to VirusTotal, but I like it a little bit better, and it will usually link back to VirusTotal, at least in the past it did, into that community tab. So if the file that you've uploaded, for example, doesn't exist in VirusTotal, which I think if it does exist in VirusTotal, it will link it back to hybrid analysis within that community tab. And within hybrid analysis, it goes really deep into what the file is actively doing or actually doing. I'll pull up what one of those reports looks like. And I say it's a cheap replacement for a malware engineer or a reverser. So unless you're a large company, my guess is you're not going to have the time to sit there and reverse malware to pull out indicators and figure out what exactly is going on with the XE. And you need to do it in a fast way, so you're not spending hours or days going through someone else's code. So it's a cheap replacement for a malware engineer. We've had decent success with it. Another tool that I've leveraged as well, which I don't hit here, but if you're not a member of the FBI's InfraGard, I'd highly recommend joining the InfraGard from a security perspective. They have a tool called Malware Analyzer where you can submit the malware directly to them, and then they actually have a team that will go through, analyze it, and in a couple of days give you a report based on what they're seeing. That's a little bit more secure, but again, it's going to take a little bit more time to get that information back to figure out what exactly it's doing and if there's indicators that you can search on your network. So let's visit that site.
You okay? Need some? Yeah. Need some coffee?
So this is hybrid analysis. Here you can drag and drop files for instant analysis. You can do a report search, Yara search, string search, etc. Let's do that Facebook. I'll come back to this with because I have a link of files that we've already analyzed. I'll pull this up so you can take a look and see what the files actually are, because I don't feel like waiting for this to go through its analysis. It does take a little bit of time, but it's usually under an hour that it comes back with an XE in my experience. Has anyone leveraged hybrid analysis before? Okay, just one person. What else have you all leveraged for?
If you're government or non-profit, I don't know, government or state type thing, I think you can get access to MSISAC, and they have an MCAP program where you just upload files, and it's awesome. It'll make like a video, they'll actually run and try to detonate whatever it is you send them, and it'll show you a video of it launching, and it'll do other, it gives you lists of everything it does. There's also urlscan.io, which is really good. Have you done that one?
Yeah. And MSISAC is a good one. I just listed down, but yeah, that's another one.
But you have to be government or something to get on their list or whatever,
yeah.
Or a school or a state school or something.
In addition, Joe Sandbox allows a number of free full sandbox runs and reports. Similar to VirusTotal, though, you're making any data in that public.
Yeah.
And there's another one called app.any.run.
Yeah, and the app.any. Okay, so moving on, open source tool Suricata. Who here is familiar with Suricata? Perfect. So it is a signature-based network intrusion detection sensor or system. It's free, it's open source, it's fast, and it lets you detect known malicious items on your network. It's capable of real-time intrusion detection, inline intrusion prevention. Speaking of, has anyone set it up in intrusion prevention mode? Or is everyone just leveraging it for intrusion detection? So that's what I've seen as well. The difference here is prevention. You can actually configure it to work with different items on your network that it can auto-block and auto-blacklist certain things once it discovers them on your network. Most organizations that I've come across, though, just use it as a detection method and then keep a human in the mix for actively turning stuff off. So what does it do? It inspects your network traffic using rules and signature languages. And then it outputs that in different formats like YAML, JSON, etc., so that you can integrate that with essentially any log aggregator that you're leveraging. Here they say Splunk, Elasticsearch, Kibana, other databases. Along the same lines of Suricata, so Suricata is great if you keep it up to date. Suricata Update. This is another open source tool. There's a link to the GitHub page right there. It's a tool for updating your Suricata rules, and I found that it is to date, the best thing that I have come across for automating daily updates of my Suricata sensors. And I'll show you what that looks like. So once you have Suricata Update installed, you can do list sources, and it's going to go through and let you know what sources you can leverage. Off the top, you can, anything that has licensed MIT, that means it's free, and anything down here for non-commercial, that means you can use it for non-commercial purposes. These other ones, you do require an API key. But you can go through and you can enable both the OSIF as well as the emergent threats rule sets to get those in there, and then the SSL Labs blacklist. You can get all those threat intel rule sets on your sensor, actively updating your network, and then you can run Suricata update as a cron job on a daily basis so that it's updating those rule sets every single day at a specific time. So now it's out of your hands, you don't need to worry about it as long as it's online, and it's going to be sending all of that data or any anomalous data that it's finding to your log aggregator.
Can you set up your own internal repositories or your own YAML rules and stuff so that they would get deployed?
I've never done that. I've never had the opportunity to. I don't know. I believe so. It's very scalable, but off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd have to research it and see. What I've done though, so this does have a way, if I'm not mistaken, of integrating with Alienvault's Open Threat Exchange. And what I usually do is throw all of my rules and IOCs that I'm coming across into Alienvault, and then I subscribe to that specific pulse, and I just pull those down from there. So it's automatically doing that.
There's also the opportunity, sometimes those are PLP rails.
Yeah, I'm looking at this more from like the non-government side. Okay, so Suricata update and Suricata go hand in hand, and I highly recommend it. If you're going to do Suricata, you leverage some type of framework for it.
There's also an open source platform on top of Suricata for the elk stack. It's called Selks.
Okay.
So it's a Suricata elk stack by Scamus Network.
Okay.
And it also provides a web interface called Cirrus that will help you do rule set management for exactly what you did right there, except just through the field to manage it and what your incoming feeds and stuff are in.
Okay, awesome.
It's pretty nice.
So
you
what's
can
that
probably
called?
stand up it by itself maybe without having the whole elk stack out. I've never done that before.
What's
And
it called again?
It's called Selks.
Selks.
Scamus.
SELKS?
Yeah, just S and an elk.
Awesome. Yeah,
With another S at the end.
later we'll get into, because I do have a Kavana stood up with an interface, but it was all manual that we set up.
The nice thing is they package it all together, so you just play it out.
And that's kind of similar to Graylog. Have you heard of Graylog before?
Yep.
So it's kind of getting away from OSINT tools and network sensors. Graylog essentially is your log aggregator. So it leverages Elastic as its backend and helps you parse and enrich logs into your backend so you can better visualize them. And this is where you get with open source tooling into a little bit of fun, let's say. So I love Graylog from the aspect of I can take log data, and it's very easy for me to normalize that log data into a backend instead of writing my own normalization. They have a lot of plugins that are available for Suricata, for Snort, for other engines, so that I don't need to spend the time, all right, taking all of this data and then mapping the fields to IP address and domain, etc. It will do that automatically for me. I love that about Graylog. What I don't like about Graylog, but like about Kavana over Graylog from a user interface perspective is I like to create dashboards and then drill down in those dashboards, and we'll get to this. I'll show you what that looks like later. The problem that I have with Graylog is the majority of the dashboards that come with the various plugins that they have are not drillable, meaning if they look great from a, showing your C-suite team coming in, saying, look at all the fun stuff we do, but from a functionality perspective, if I see that, 80% of my traffic is 443, I want to take out all that traffic because I don't care about it, I want to focus in on something else. It does not allow me to do that, versus Kavana does allow me to drill down when I need to drill down. So Graylog's a great place to start if you want to get your feet wet with like an Elastic Stack and some decent log normalization rules. Along those same lines, the Hive. Has anyone heard of the Hive project? So it's a scalable, open source, security incident response platform. So it allows you to track investigations, making everything easier for your teams. So one of the big things that we usually hit on when we go into SOCs and talk about like how to do investigations is, how are you tracking your investigations? How do you know that SOC Analyst 1 and SOC Analyst 2 aren't working on the same exact alert or same exact workflow and pulling on the same exact threads? If they don't have a tool, the Hive is free. That requires Elastic as a backend, which is easy to set up, and it's a great way for sharing intelligence across your security operations team or your IT team in its entirety, so that everyone gets visibility into exactly what's going on with your team or with a specific investigation. I leverage the Hive at a lot of different places for those internal teams so that they know what's going on, and then both myself as well as those executive teams have visibility into the types of investigations that we're seeing at an organization, as well as the how often certain things are happening. So you can get good insights with the Hive, such as how many investigations were phishing, how many investigations were brought to you by, let's say, your snort or your Suricata sensor. How many investigations were brought to you by your host-based intrusion detection sensor? And you can break those down and display those in an intuitive way so that you as a SOC team know where to put resources. Usually it's phishing, because I've seen phishing inboxes blow up, but it allows you to be a little bit more strategic about where you can place resources and where you can spend your time. So Elk Stack, that's Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Again, it's open source and allows you to, it essentially acts as a large log aggregator, though it's a little bit more manual in the sense that, of course, Celx might do this, and I'm going to look into that after this, but it allows you to build out dashboards and aggregate logs across your organization. So, one thing I haven't touched on yet, and I say low budget, so all of these tools so far are open source, so they're free, but you need infrastructure to run them on. And I've seen that be a huge problem for most security operation teams, that they don't have a budget, or they're scraping or scrounging around for any type of hardware that they could start throwing these things on. My recommendation has always been eBay, and it's funny, but it works. So on eBay right now, last time I checked, you can go get a Dell R700 server with Intel dual quad-core Intel Xeon processors, 48 gigs of RAM, and about a terabyte of rated storage for around $350 with 4 network cards already on there. So when you need some type of infrastructure to run these tools on, eBay is a great place to start so that you can show your teams or your manager, whoever is approving your budget, that to implement these tools, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of your time, but you can do this under budget. You don't need to spend a ridiculous amount of money to get these things up and operational. Now, I'm not saying this is the best architecture, because you're going to be leveraging older technology. It's better than nothing, though. Along those same lines, and as a side anecdote, if you do sell your stuff on eBay, make sure to wipe it or pull the drives and destroy those drives. I bought a Dell R700 server on eBay, got it back to my house, put it in my little lab in my basement, spun it up, and it was a Windows 2008 box. I was like, oh, cool, popped a little CD in, so it wiped out the local admin creds, logged in. It was a SQL 2008 box for a marketing company based out of New York that had all of their customer data in their database, and they sold that stuff on eBay. Now, I did not do anything with that because I am not on the malicious side, but had that been someone malicious, they could have taken all that data and done with it what they wanted. So that's the other fun thing about buying stuff on eBay, is you never know what you're going to get. You're nodding over here.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? Have you come across anything interesting?
Yeah. It was I found stuff. Side of the road too. Old computers just thrown out. Those are pretty good.
So along those lines, if your organization doesn't have a policy in place for destruction of old IT equipment, it's probably a priority to put that in place just so that you're not compromised that way. What's this? Stack. All right, so Alienvault. Who's heard of Alienvault? Perfect. So Alienvault makes an OSIM. It's called an open source SIM. It is great if you've never had experience with a SIM before, such as like ArcSight, Splunk, one of the major ones. It's also incredibly cheap. I believe it's around $20,000 or $30,000 a year if you actually use their paid version and not their free version, which is orders of magnitude cheaper than your other tools that are out there. So I think I priced out RSAs for an organization and it was around like $450,000 when this was $30,000 for that same organization. So it makes a huge difference for the org to get them spun up and get them something in place so that you can get visibility into that network, into those networks. OSSEC. Has anyone heard of OSSEC? So OSSEC is an open source host-based intrusion detection system. It does local on the machine, log analysis, integrity checking, Windows registry monitoring, rootkit detection, and sends all that data back to a centralized log aggregator. Alienvault by default has OSSEC agents built into its platform, so you can deploy those directly through Alienvault's web UI. Or alternatively, if you don't want to use that, you can spin up by visiting the ossec.net. You can run your own server that you can deploy agents from and have them send that log data back to whatever log aggregator that you're leveraging. Another open source tool is OS Query. So this allows you to query across your hosts for installed programs, file hashes, etc. So during an investigation, it's an invaluable tool if you do not have the capability through your host-based agents. One of my recommendations for a place to spend money is your host-based intrusion detection agents. So I am not going to endorse any. I've leveraged both Carbon Black and CrowdStrike, and both of their tools are phenomenal. Specifically, since we've deployed those at multiple orgs, we haven't had any adware, malware, outbreaks, etc., and we've been able to detect when those organizations have gone out and had third-party pen testers come in and try to pen test those organizations. Although both of those tools haven't necessarily blocked those pen testers, we've at least been able to detect what was going on and then manually go through and put a block in place, which is huge. It's time to detection. We were able to see in real time what an attacker was doing on the network, specifically with Carbon Black. So, again, OS Query and OSSEC are great if you can't spend the money, but I highly recommend that that's a place that your organization spends the money because you need to control the endpoints. And if you're controlling those endpoints, your chances of you getting popped are a lot smaller. Alright, so the last thing that I have from the open source tools for this portion is packet total. So who here is a network person? 1, 2, 3, 4-ish. Great. So as part of your role as a security analyst, you're going to come across packets and you have to do packet analysis. Has anyone here done packet analysis before? The same people that are network guys. Awesome. That's the issue. So it's very difficult to do packet analysis if you're not a network person and have not come across packets before or have spent a lot of time doing this type of analysis before. What packet total does is it allows you to take that PCAP, upload it to their system, and they will automatically analyze it for you and then spit out a nice pretty report that you can go through and click on different tabs to see what's going on with that packet. So it's a cheap and easy way for someone without that network experience or without a network person on hand as part of the security team to get an idea as to what's going on with the packet. The privacy concern here is just like VirusTotal. When you upload a packet, it is public. So anyone can now go through and look and see what exactly is going on. So take that with a grain of salt. I actually have an example of this too. I'm going to visit Packet Total and show you what I mean. There we go. Where's their search? Okay, so these are all the packets that have been uploaded to Packet Total that contain the string Coinbase.com, the URL Coinbase.com. So if you want to go through and see what's going on with a specific organization, do some recon. If they're network engineers, because that's more often what I've seen is the network engineers upload stuff here, you can search and you can get that data on this organization. I know some guys at Coinbase, and it was being recorded, but not to pop their thing, but when you go through and do a security, if you want to become part of the security team, they'll send you a PCAP. It's this Incident 1 PCAP, where you can go through and analyze it and whatnot. So someone who was going through the interview process at Coinbase uploaded that PCAP to Packet Total, which is cool. I mean, you can see what it is. So this is what I like about Packet Total from a non-network engineer, non-network person perspective, is right off the bat, it shows us what the malicious activity is. So web server, possible CVE 2014-6271 attempt. Off the top of your head, does anyone know what CVE that is? I think it's shell shock. I think that's the shell shock vulnerability that they were that was leveraged back in the day. Just let me Google that and make sure.
Red Hat customer portal, the commentary on it. Sounds like it.
Where are we?
Yeah, because it says specially
Yeah,
crafted
mitigating
environment.
shell shock. Yeah, go back. Yeah, so it was shell shock. So essentially what they did is they had a shell shock vulnerability that they wanted, mitigating the shell shock vulnerability. So, had this not been an actual, test, someone would have been able to determine that at some point Coinbase was susceptible to this attack, and they may or may not have been breached. We could go through the packet and determine if they were or if they were not. So it's great for analyzing stuff and figuring out what's going on, but there are privacy concerns with that specific tool. So, any questions on Packet Total? Awesome. So let's take a go on.
Just add a little to it. If you need to do anything bulk, you can upload a bulk through there. They actually have a way directly through command lines to upload bulk in PCAPs.
Okay. Okay.
Through
Awesome.
their GitHub.
Yeah. So if you have a ton of stuff that you need analyzed, we'll be able to. You can upload to the API, which is great. All right. So let's take 10 minutes. When we come back, we are going to go over actual threat hunting. So we're going to review the F3EA hunting framework, what it actually is, and then go through some.
Our social media presence goes beyond this. We reserve the right to this, that, and the other.
Okay, welcome back everybody. So we're going to go over the F3EA hunting framework. For those of you that don't know, probably most of you, F3EAD is a system that allows our special forces to anticipate and predict enemy operations, identify, locate, target the enemy forces, and perform intelligence exploitation analysis of the captured enemy personnel and material. So, looking at this cycle from an information security perspective, it's fairly obvious that this can be applied to that cybersecurity context. So, We can replace stuff, and I don't have this up here on this one because I already took it out, but like kill or capture, we're obviously not killing or capturing enemy combatants. We can replace that with like remove or restrict. So view it as like an endpoint on your network or something on your network, rather restricting its access or removing it completely from that. So many security teams do the practice of find, remove, onto the next. And while that is the core of this cycle, there's still value in defining the process within the confines of this framework so that you have your team has a repeatable process that you can leverage and use, track, and then if 6 months from now someone comes up with, someone asks you why you did X, you can go through this process leveraging the Hive and some other tooling that we've showed before, as well as this framework, and say, we did this because of X, and all of your analysts can agree on it. So, a lot of people have asked me, is this merely reinventing the wheel of the intelligence cycle? Yes and no. I'd say no, because this cycle is specifically for the tactical level. So you have your strategic level, you have your operational level, and you have your tactical level. Your tactical level is basically actually doing the work and not thinking about doing the work. So this is designed more for that tactical level versus your other frameworks and your other cycles are designed more for that strategic level. So what are each portion of the framework? First one's find. Picking up the scent of our opponent with the classic who, what, where, when, and why questions being used within this phase to identify what that candidate target is. An example that I like to use is we have suspect activity identified in a number of hosts. And when I'm saying find, I'm not saying it from the sense of we're looking at an alert that came across that's on a number of hosts, because that's going to be separate. This is, we've detected some weird activity on our network. Let's say SMB, so port 445 traffic outbound on our network. We've detected that on a number of different hosts. So that's suspicious activity. We found it. What next? Cycle 2 is fix, so verification of those targets identified within that previous phase, which typically involves multiple triangulation points, so multiple data points. So it effectively transforms our intelligence gained within the find phase into evidence that can be used as a basis for action within the next stage. An example is multiple indicators of suspicious activity identified in a cluster of infected hosts. And what we want here, though, is verification of those targets. So where we have IP addresses and ports, we now need to convert those IP addresses into actually, are they servers? Is it someone's phone? Is it someone's endpoint? Who are these individuals? Who are they? Because now we can start making better decisions based on, this is coming off our domain controller or it's coming off someone's Windows phone. So based on, next cycle is finished, based on the evidence generated from the previous two phases, the commander of the operation imposes their will on the target. And I love that, imposes their will. So in this case, hosts are taken offline, or employees are given new machines. You have to have some type of architecture in place to be able to do this. Most of the OSINT tools that we covered to date would not give you that capability. So depending on your process, this might be a call to your network team or system team saying, take this port offline. Or it might be a call to your endpoint detection team saying, we need this host to quarantine based on what you have. So there's a number of different outcomes. But the goal here is, by any means necessary, taking this host offline and ensuring that no further damage can be done to your network. Most threat actors, when they're on your network, they'll be able to identify that you guys are finding them, and they'll start to laterally move throughout your network at a faster pace if they see that you're trying to knock them offline. So the time to detection and the time to get them off your network is key. If you do not have policies in place for that, I'd highly recommend putting policies in place for that. If you don't have policies in place, I always say it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. And we've done that a number of times at various orgs where we've detected something suspicious or malicious. We did not like what we were seeing, so we arbitrarily took the machine offline, quarantined it, blocked it, and then continued our investigation while communicating with, we'll say, the managerial level and above teams, letting them know that, hey, we took this offline because we thought we detected something suspicious. Most organizations are not going to fault you for reacting that way because they want to be protected. Like, that's the purpose. That's why they have you working for them. So now that the machine's offline, the next phase is exploit. So deconstruction of the evidence that was generated from that finish phase. So based on the analysis of the malware that we found, or network traffic, the PCAP analysis that we did within those affected hosts, there was a number of specific indicators of compromise that we were able to identify by our team. So we're going to take that and we're going to feed those back into our cycle, which brings us to the analyze phase. So we fuse all of that data, all of that evidence with the wider, we'll call it intelligence picture. So taking our in-house IOCs that we found, and then our third-party threat intelligence feed, and then looking to see if we can have any type of attribution, if we can determine who this person is it a single individual, is it a insider threat, or is it, I doubt it's a nation state, but is it an APT that's looking to get into our network that we've been able to identify their anomalous behavior. So we found them, we took them offline, we gathered intelligence, and now we're trying to attribute to who this person is and what they're actually doing. And then it goes back to find. So it completes the circle. So find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and then once we've analyzed that, once we've added that back into our process, now we're back to, okay, we're done, that investigation's over, let's go back to finding anomalous activity on our network. So I covered that pretty quickly. Does anyone have any questions on the framework that we leverage to find evil? Great, so I'm going to get into threat hunting. Oops. Okay, so we're going to cover threat hunting and how to approach an investigation, and then some example analyses that we've done, or dashboards that we've built out to with the open source tools to figure out what's going on in a network. So there's a difference, or what's the difference between alert triage versus threat hunting? So alert triage, or what I like to call it is alert fatigue, is simply waiting for your appliances, your users, whatever it is, to generate an alert to your security operations team. At one organization that I worked, they actually had a dedicated person for phishing emails. His sole job was to monitor the phishing inbox and then go through every single one of those emails and determine if it was malicious or not. The problem was 90% of the emails that came into the inbox were spam. So essentially his job was a spam bot. He was just saying, okay, block this at, we'll say, Office 365 because it's spam. Block this because it's spam. Block this because it's spam. So that gets into alert fatigue, and that's why I call it alert fatigue, because you're not going to enjoy that job. Versus threat hunting, which is actively looking for suspicious or artifacts on your networks and systems, and that's where it's fun. That, in my opinion, that's where you get to the fun stuff. So you're not doing that monotonous, okay, an alert came in. You're actively going through and trying to detect and trying to find anomalous activity on your network, and then building out automated rule sets based on the workflows that you're doing. So threat hunting essentially is that technique that teams should use to improve their detection. Threat hunting should not be the only or even primary technique to identify threats because it's not scalable. So by not scalable, I mean it's human scalable. So when you have individuals that are threat hunting on your network, the only way to get more threat hunters on your network is to hire more people. that's not a scalable way. So we have to find like a way to be efficient. So there needs to be some level of automation, and that's where we start delineating threat hunting versus what we'll call, and I think we'll get into this eventually, like machine learning, or starting to push your workflows into some type of machine learning engine or dashboard that automates what you actually do, so that now your job now becomes threat hunting, finding cool stuff, and then you've built out some machine or some dashboard that is essentially alert triage again, that you can push down to those level 1 SOC analysts to look for and wait and detect when a hit comes. So our SOC team uses threat hunting to help us build and test new behavior signatures. They're looking for like specific attacker techniques, patterns, an indicator set, or like a metadata concept essentially. So, examples. I do have some examples. So like, for example, a Windows shell making a network connection to an external host. That should never happen. So we're going to build out a rule set or a dashboard or whatever it might be that's going to generate an alert for us when that does happen, so we don't manually need to go through all of our data anymore and do that. Network connections to a domain from a newly observed domain feed. Okay, so our site, so there's a number of newly observed domain feeds that are out there which are open source. We have rule sets where we're pulling that data in from an API, and then we're running that against all the network traffic, the NetFlow, Westflow traffic that we're actually seeing. Because odds are, if our network is communicating with a newly created domain, that newly created domain is probably some C2 node for some malware strain that's out there. And I think the last one, let's see. Oh yeah, metadata. So a process where the executing binary has never been observed in any customer environment before. So Carbon Black hasn't seen it, VirusTotal hasn't seen it, Hybrid Analysis hasn't seen it. You know, that's going to throw up some indicators. Unless it was developed in-house, why do we have a binary on our network that literally no one's seen before? Like, that's going to throw some indicators up. So with threat hunting, going through a hunt and not finding something is okay. Like, that is what you want, because when you do find something, that's when things get really, really busy. The problem, though, is that most threat hunting processes do not have a way to handle false positives. So your day as a threat hunter ends up going down a number of different rabbit holes because you're not sure if it is malicious or not. You have to figure out what it is. You're using that every EA cycle to figure out what's going on. It ends up being a false positive, so that's it. What do you do in that case? In those cases, that's why we leverage tools like the Hive. So some type of investigative framework where you can go through and you can say, we've seen this file hash before, we've seen this network, this IP address before, we've seen this domain before. So now your team, your threat hunting team, can search through the Hive once they find an indicator. No one's seen it before, great. Now they can go through that entire process. Someone's seen it before and it's a false positive, move on to the next thing. The other thing is, in the pure threat hunting model, so the hunter has to maintain documentation, and that's why I like to use the Hive, or have an intimate knowledge of the environment that they're dealing with. And who here has an intimate knowledge of both your network and OS stack at your organization? So 2 guys. So for the rest of you, or 3 guys. So 3 guys. So beyond those 3, so the rest of you would have to leverage a tool like the Hive or some other knowledge base whereby you can go through and do that. And I think that's the norm. So the norm is, it's great to have and understand an organization's complete stack from soup to nuts. But I don't think that's realistic anymore with the turnover of individuals or organizations and the way that organizations grow and the pace at which technology changes. So how do we approach an investigation? There's 2 things. There's perception and there's reality. Perception is always greater than reality. Perception is a way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something. Reality is the state of things as they actually exist. And I like to make sure everyone understands their biases when going through an investigation. So, if your background is, let's say, you're a DNS architect, now you're doing security operations work. When you're seeing suspicious DNS traffic, your perception is going to be different than someone who has never done or admin a DNS server before, let's say, because they just know to look for anomalous or suspicious activity. They don't necessarily know what it means versus you know what it means. The problem ends up being, though, that you're a little bit more biased towards DNS traffic because you know it, and you have to understand what your biases are as you're going through an investigation, so you don't get in that hole of you think you found something because it's not something that you've seen before, but it actually is a false positive. And that's what reality is, the state of things as it actually exists. How to work on your biases, we don't go into that in this course, but as long as you're aware of what your biases are, then you're going to be a better threat hunter. So approaching the investigation. So your network consists of devices, applications, data, and users that support your business. You need to understand what those are and have context. You're responsible to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your network. CIA triage, everyone's heard of that before, and your network is at risk due to the threat of attackers compromising your network. So, one thing to note here is context based on your networks and systems. Whenever we work with an organization, we don't, how do I say this in a way? So security people tend to be a little bit salty. If people don't know what that salty is, cynical, because no one ever follows best practices and we go in and every network's always compromised. The problem is you can't go into an organization and just start hitting them over the head for not, following password best practices or following, some type of best practice, which is why they were compromised, which is why you're there. You have to have context as to what's going on. And the best example I have is this. So my background is a little bit engineering and architecture as well. And I had to go overseas to Germany because the organization I worked for was having issues communicating from the Germany data center back to the New York data center. So they sent me over there to figure out what was going on. So I went over there and I figured out what was going on. It was just a stupid routing issue with the local ISP. It took me 3 days to figure out what was going on. I flew in on a Sunday night. I was flying back out on a Saturday. On Wednesday, the CFO calls me and he says, "How's everything going?" I said, "It's going great." He says, "Okay, listen, I promised the board that you would set up a virtual system over there using Citrix Xen server was what this organization used. So I said that you were going to set up a mini data center over there for them. You need to set that up before you leave." And I said, "I'm literally leaving Saturday morning. It's Wednesday and we have no equipment." And he said, "Get it done," and he hung up the phone. So I had 2 days to try to figure out how to acquire equipment and get everything up and operational within the small office. I did it. I found a Buffalo Terra station that I leveraged for my SAN, which was a 1 terabyte rated system designed for low impact file servers. I found and this was a curious one, a Toshiba pizza box server. Has anyone seen Toshiba servers? Yeah. Toshiba makes servers, which I didn't know, Europe. So I found that, which had 48 gigs of RAM and was able to throw Citrix Xen Center on there and then present the Buffalo Terra station as it's back in SAN.
You found this at the location or you're going out?
No, I leveraged some of my local contacts there to find someone that actually, a supplier that had that, which was a whole another issue, language barrier and all. So I got that up and operational, and we were able to get that done on Friday. Right. So now they had their own terminal server, they have their own domain controller, they had a bunch of other systems that we were running virtually, with the thought that this is probably going to run for 3 to 6 months, and then we need to better architect this, and then send someone out back there to put something a little bit more robust in place. That system ran for 4 years before someone went back and actually fixed it. So, not knowing that context, anyone that would come into that office and see that would think to themselves, "What idiot set this up? Why would they do that?" Because it's literally bubblegum and string together to work. But without context, like you don't know. So always approach your investigations with that type of attitude, that you don't know the context, you don't know what's going on, or at least try to understand that context, and people will open up a little bit more for you. Talking about like pen tester stuff, like you essentially have to like social engineer people, like your user base, your management, etc., to get them to get the pieces of information that you want and being friendly about it. Because if you're trying to do an investigation and pushing back on the user, they're just going to shut down and you're not going to get the data that you need, and then in the future they're not going to be willing to open up to you. Along those same lines, as I'm talking about investigations, the best thing you can do for your user base is some type of security awareness training. And again, I'll plug two organizations. I'm not going to endorse either of them, but both KnowBe4 and Wombat offer some decent security awareness training at the basic level. And we've had great success implementing either bi-weekly or monthly security awareness training with small 5 to 10 minute interactive modules. And what ends up happening is the users over time build up their security expertise to the point where at one organization we're receiving, like, users just forwarding us suspicious emails, or they give our security team a phone call when they start getting those what's it called, phishing, voice phishing, where people are calling in and trying to get them to go to some go-to meeting crap, or Microsoft support calls and says, oh, your computer's slow. But we have those users, so those employees are actually reaching out to our team now because they're aware of these risks and what's actually going on. Okay, so approaching an investigation, understanding that, having that context, you're responsible for the CIA triage and your network is at risk because of threat actors trying to compromise your network. So that third piece, that's the other piece of this. Based on what your industry is, you should know what the threat actors are actually going after, all right? I'll take the educational industry as an example. In education, they're not trying to steal IP, they're not trying to steal curriculum because it's for the most part open and it's easy to get. They're trying to breach those organizations so that they can leverage those orgs to attack other organizations. I had one guy, one organization who thought he was smart because he blocked all non-US based IP addresses. That's great, you're not going to get like the script kiddie from Russia now trying to get you, but someone's just going to proxy their connection through an already compromised host in the US, and you're not going to be able to detect that because you think you're safe because of that. So the other one is biotechnology. So I do help a lot of biotech startups, and that's like, I think, number 2 on the Chinese list of things to go after to steal IP from US-based companies. So understanding that with biotech, that it's their IP that they're after, we can better construct or architect a program around that, and then build out rule sets, dashboards, etc., around wherever their IP is stored. IP is intellectual property. So understanding the risks of the organization that you're in can allow you to make better decisions when it comes to where to search, what to look for, etc. Any questions with how to approach an investigation? All right, so attackers. An attacker is someone who attempts to gain unauthorized access to your network, either directly or indirectly. Understand that. And then understand that all attackers have one thing in common: they want to steal from you. Whether that's money, IP, time, reputation, I like to throw freedom in there, whatever it is, they're trying to steal something from your organization. So there's 2 different types of attacks. There's opportunistic versus targeted. Opportunistic is, in my opinion, easier to detect and find. Targeted is harder. Opportunistic attacks are your classic script kiddie that's just searching the internet for exposed RDP ports and then brute forcing that. That's, they're not targeting a specific organization, they're just kind of playing around, finding anything they want to find. Targeted is the attacker is specifically going after your organization. Those are the scary type of attackers who come after you because they're smart, they're slow, and they've done a lot of recon prior to attacking your organization. If you look me up, to each their own from a privacy perspective, but if you look me up, I don't have any social media other than an Instagram account. I got rid of my LinkedIn, I got rid of my Facebook, I got rid of all that because I've done so much pen testing that it's very easy for me to pull up everyone's LinkedIn profile for an organization that I want to target, and I can look at their IT guys and they'll list servers and the versions that they're using. So now I have an incredibly small list. I know that they're running, Windows 2008 and SQL Server 2005 on their Windows 2008 server. That's very specific, and it allows me to be very targeted when I go after them. So targeted attackers do that, and they look to be mean. So unstructured versus structured attackers. Unstructured are, again, I send them into the same realm that I do the opportunistic attackers, where they're kind of just like having fun, it is fun, having fun. So they're finding open ports and kind of throwing the kitchen sink at everything, using Metasploit, running out a bunch of crap through Metasploit to see what sticks and what doesn't stick, making a bunch of noise, right? They're going to be very easy to detect because one of your sensors is going to go off somewhere with the amount of stuff that they're actually doing on your network. Structured attackers, again, they're more targeted as well. They're going to be low and slow. They know that you more than likely have some type of security tooling in place, and they want to make sure they do not set any of that off. So I can't remember if I used this example earlier, but we had a third-party organization attack us, and I specifically told him, I said, listen, we have host-based intrusion detection sensors, we have network-based intrusion detection sensors, we have SIM, we have next-gen firewalls in place. I said, so throw something at us that's not necessarily going to set any of that stuff off. And he did. And we were able to detect that he was on our network, but not necessarily block that he was on our network. He ended up compromising a domain admin's username and password, but wasn't able to actively do anything with that username and password because he was being low and slow. So he never did a port scan or ping sweep of the entire network to see where everything was. He was able to breach a branch office. That branch office had a domain admin, stole their creds. We deployed read-only domain controllers at all of our offices because that's proper security architecture. He only attempted to go after that read-only domain controller because that's the only one he knew of, and he knew that if he scanned anything else on our network, it was going to send off flags. So none of his attacks worked purely because that was a read-only domain controller. So good reason to structure or to layer your security is that you're always going to have some type of defense in place. So compromise. Compromise or breach occurs when an attacker accesses or controls a device connected to your network. Is anyone in here a lawyer? Were they a lawyer? Have they worked with lawyers? All right, perfect. So never ever, no matter what, call anything a breach. Because if you call something a breach, then you're at fault and it sets off a number of different flags. I always call something a compromise or an investigation or whatever you want. Do not call it a breach. It represents the relationship between the attacker and your network. Compromise can be perpetuated by a human attacker or automated malicious code, and it's only successful when the attacker accomplishes their goal. So back to this breach statement. We do a lot of role-playing where we'll go into an organization and role-play for what happens if a breach occurs. This is what you need to do. You need to communicate it out, you need to have a press release, etc. The reason you never want to call it a breach is because you look as an organization like you're at fault, even though you're the victim. And that's huge in the perceptions, in the minds of people who are seeing this in the news. You always want to be viewed as the victim. You don't want to be viewed as, you had lax security controls, or it was your fault because, someone wasn't manning the helm. Because at the end of the day, defenders have to be right 100% of the time, and attacker has to be right once. That's it, one time. It's a losing battle, and you will be compromised eventually. You just want to make sure your organization can put its best foot forward during that time and during that process. Any questions with that?
Breach also signifies that information was compromised. Where if you say compromised, it means somebody may have had unauthorized access, but not necessarily been able to access information they weren't supposed to. Where if you say breach, most people believe your hair's on fire, they had access to everything and you don't know what they got.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? Good. Okay, so for this lab, this is from Chris Sanders. Thank you. He does great courses on threat hunting and a number of other things. So I stole this example from him because I really liked it. Take a moment to look at this architecture, and then I want you to think about two things from an attacker perspective. Can you all read that? Can you read what the servers and everything are? Or did you make that bigger? Take a moment to think about this from an attacker perspective. Where do you want to go? And then think about this from a budgetary defender perspective. You essentially can place, let's say, one network intrusion detection sensor on your network and a handful of host-based intrusion detection sensors. We'll say 3 host-based sensors on systems. Where do you want to place them? So take a minute and then I'll go around and call on a couple people. There is a right answer for both of those. Okay, from an attacker perspective, does anyone want to give a whack at where they would try to attack?
I'm sorry, I would try to go to the database server. Here's the reason why. A lot of they keep a lot of tables, and there's got to be a user table, right? And in there, from what I've been looking, I mean, this is just from what I've been looking in labs. I have no real world experience on that. They might keep information, a database with users, and there's a big chance the admin credentials might be stored there. So once I have admin passwords, I might be able to move laterally the network and see what's going on.
So absolutely correct. So the database server is where IP is stored, gold, whatever it is. That's where the data that most attackers go after want. It's the last machine that you want to see compromised on your network. You want to see anomalous activity from. So from a defender perspective, does anyone want to give a whack at where we should place a network sensor and where we can place 3 host-based sensors?
I guess the network one should go somewhere between the edge router and the switch, the first switch.
Okay, so where's my mouse? So right here?
Yeah, like somewhere around there,
Okay.
because that covers your entire network.
Okay. Does anybody disagree? Where do you think it should go?
I mean, I would still put it that switch, but I would only look at traffic. Because I only care about the e-commerce website and then one internally in the server mode.
So you put one here. So you put one here and then one down at this switch. So yeah, this network is architected funny. I would put one here just so I could see all traffic coming from all these VLANs as well as the e-commerce stuff. But at the end of the day, if the e-commerce system's compromised, they're more than likely, if the ACLs are set up correctly, not going to be able to get inside the network. So right here is where I'm going to get the most information, the most relevant information that I'd be after. From a host-based detection, where should we put those 3 sensors?
Just on the 3 servers?
Yeah. So the 3 servers. So we have something on our e-commerce web server, which again reinforces the fact that we can put our network stuff down here because it should pick up most anomalous stuff that's going off here. And you obviously want one on both your database server as well as your domain controller to ensure that nothing critical, nothing major is occurring on those things, and you don't have any type of anomalous activity occurring. Okay, so next we're going to get into asking questions. So what I want you to think about is any real or hypothetical initial observation. So you can make them alerts, take something you've seen on your own network, take something you've seen in your lab, and then describe 3 questions you would ask to begin your investigation. I have one, so I'll start, but if a couple of you could come up with one over maybe like 5 minutes, we can go over those ones as well. So my example is we have 100 consecutive failed login attempts on an employee's account. So it generated an alert to our SIM, and then we're going to start asking questions. The questions that I'm looking to ask are, is this something the employee is aware of? Were any attempts eventually successful? And is the logon from a location that is expected? So come up with a couple real or hypothetical observations, and then I'll call on you or just raise your hand, and we can go over what questions we would ask for those. So take like 2 minutes to think about something, or if you have some real world examples, feel free to shout them out now, and we can cover them now.
If that employee's email has come up in any breaches, like have I been pwned, for example.
Okay.
Can I find that employee's email or any other links that, like, you know, is there an obvious answer?
Yeah, and that's a good one too, because most users reuse passwords across the board. So if it's their Yahoo account, for example, that's been pawned, it might be they might have leveraged that same password for your network as well. Another one that I have is, and this is where we get into security best practices, again, SMB outbound. So we discovered a host on our network that's communicating outbound across port 445. So we should never see that. So off the top of my head, the questions that I would have is, what is that host? Is that a server, or is that a user's endpoint? And then it's a user's endpoint. So who is that user? Is that user our CEO? Is that user our executive assistant to the CEO? Or is that user someone in our maintenance department? Is that user someone that is in our biotech department that's working directly with our IP address? And is there any other suspicious or anomalous activity coming off of that host? So we see outbound 445 traffic from that host. What's it doing internally? Do we see it communicating to our database server? Do we see it communicating to our domain controller? Do we see it communicating to other systems on the network that we haven't seen it doing that in the last 3 months or so? So these are questions that you want to ask during your investigative process. And it's hard to say, it's hard to give you right questions because there really aren't. There's good questions and there's okay questions. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to give a list of the questions that you should ask because it's all dependent on your specific network, data sets that you have access to, and what exactly is going on, what your role is within the organization. My biggest thing is having access to all the data. So you can't, in my opinion, have access to too many data sets. Yeah, it might get overwhelming, but at least you'll be able to ask specific questions for specific investigations if you have access to the right data. There's been a lot of times where we've gone into organizations and they have SFlow or NetFlow data, but that's it. They have nothing that's going off that's coming off the endpoint. They have no endpoint logs, and they don't have any intrusion detection systems or set up in place, and their firewall wasn't logging to anywhere. It was logging locally and keeping 4 hours logs, and they don't have any type of SSL in the middle deconstruction going on. So
in my organization, we're global, and most people will share information if you ask. So we were getting SIM alerts for impossible travel. User yesterday logged in Charleston, today they logged in London. So I reached out to the travel people who coordinate and said, can you get me a list every Monday of who's traveling? So we could stop chasing our tail, trying to figure out, is John in London this week or is he in Singapore? And it cut down our false positives. So now when I see a login, the managed service provider knows immediately they don't have an office in Nigeria. That's a bad login. Or that user is actually in China this week. That's okay. Because that's what our problem is. We actually have offices in places you don't really want them, like Saudi Arabia.
do you have a policy in place for users that do share credentials?
No one is permitted to share credentials in theory. In fact, we're actually implementing a policy you're not allowed to travel with your equipment.
Okay. Yeah.
Phones and laptops have to stay. We're going to go
Great.
in country because in country, I don't have to worry about you taking. You think about if you go to Saudi Arabia and you have I don't want them to be women in the room, a topless picture on your phone, you can be jailed, and they won't let you on.
Yeah. So that's, you had another point too, and segue real quick. We just had a couple people go over to China for one organization. And, you know, the Chinese, they're always after IP and American intel and breaching an organization. People don't understand that the Chinese government literally runs the ISPs as well as the cell companies. So if you bring your cell phone over there, they can man in the middle of that because, yeah, you're on your cell phone, but you're communicating to a Chinese cell tower. Or you're on the hotel Wi-Fi, that's great. They're going to drop something on there to get remote access to your system and start monitoring exactly what's going on. So understanding those risks, but if you're in a situation where you have offices over there, yeah, that complicates the situation. That impossible traveler one too brings me another example. I've seen that so many times before, coming from like a lot of South Asian countries where someone will outsource their support desk overseas. And all of a sudden, we'll see a user logging in from, let's say, Oklahoma, and then a user logging in from, way over here within 5 minutes. And we couldn't figure out what was going on, but we discovered that what was occurring is a manager was sharing their credentials with a specific user or a number of users who are then logging into the network from their location. So yeah, you put the kibosh on that. Cool. Does anyone have any other examples about what questions should ask?
Just a few things we've seen. They had a forced password change recently. There'd be another device that has still got their old credentials trying to go home. And if there's a device that they have that's been lost or stolen, not reported, or is someone trying to use it?
So this is out of scope of this, but I'll say it, multi-factor. It kills 99% of attacks that occur. So if you can deploy multi-factor across your user population, there's no way that they're going to be able to access it. And not only text-based multi-factor, I mean actually leveraging and using an app. But then there's actually a paradigm shift that's coming into cybersecurity where I'm talking about controlling the network, I'm talking about controlling the endpoints, and that's great. We still need to do that. It's going to be around for a little bit longer, but it's switching to controlling the data because of services like AWS, Office 365, where people can now bring their own device to work, and they're going to use their device and their cell phone to store your organization's data. And you can't put an endpoint protection agent on that host. You can't monitor their home network if they're working from home. You'd love to, but you can't. So what do? And this is out of scope, but you're going to have to start thinking about how you put policies in place and how you leverage those cloud-based tools to start putting detection methods in place. Office 365, as much as Microsoft annoys me, they do a decent job of building out security boards for you, and you have something called a secure score, where you can go through and make your organization more secure. Whose organization here uses Microsoft and Office 365? So I'm going to say the majority of you. So there's a lot of good things that Microsoft is doing. I was at their Ignite conference a year ago, and I like the direction they're going with security, but they're making the same mistake that they always do, which is not enabling stuff by default. So like one of my biggest gripes with them is mail forwarding, right? There's no use case, in my opinion, that you should ever set a mail forward to an external domain. That should be disabled by default because that's how threat actors monitor email. They'll steal your password, set the mail forward, and it just sit there monitoring the email until they find a wire transfer or something to pick and then go from there. You can disable that through Office 365, but it's not disabled by default. It's something that you have to do with your secure score.
You have a lot of large enterprises that have subsidiaries, and they rely on mail forwarding like that.
So you can whitelist certain ones?
Yeah, but out of the box and stuff like that, they might have, a company goes from something to 365, you might have, 100,000 mail forwarding going on. Like that.
How big is that? How big is that organization?
Like double-digit billions.
Yeah. So that's yeah. This is more so for, I would say, your SMBs, your small, medium-sized businesses, because
That's what Microsoft will look at when you look at like why they default. Is that some of those?
because the guys that pay all the money,
Yeah.
they don't want to. It still annoys me.
Not
Because the problem is when one of those SMBs gets breached via wire transfer and they wire out $150,000 somewhere, that's people's paychecks that are just gone and the organization's going to go under. That's something Microsoft doesn't think about because they just care about that money. Okay. Any other questions or any other examples anyone can think of that they want to talk about? What questions we could ask?
A person's role in the company, although it sounds pretty trivial, let's say, for example, we're talking about a hospital as an organization. So let's say Nurse Jackie is, adding information about a new patient in this machine, and then let's say 2 minutes later somebody else checks in and she does the same in a different computer because there's a different area. So, taking into consideration a person's role in the company and what if it's somebody that has really no IT or no business case to be accessing whatever information or having?
Yeah. So having policies in place is the best way, but using some type of role-based access control whereby they're restricted to least privilege is the best way to go. If they're using someone else's credentials to log in, the questions I would ask from the start is why are they using someone else's credentials? So determining what's going on there, what they're actually accessing, so what are they doing with the data that they're seeing, and then what policies you as an organization have in place that you can use as teeth to do something with that user. So at the end of the day, cybersecurity is risk management, all right? If an organization wants to allow stuff like that, it's not best practice, it's not good, but if their executive team says, yeah, it's cool for that one-off case, then that is what it is. But they need to understand what those risks are so that they can make a better decision. So now you can say, yes, you allowed this and this worked. However, if we go down this path, we're going to violate all these HIPAA laws, and the data that they have access to, you're charged on a per record basis. I think it's like $150 per record or something. So if they access a database of 10,000 users, it's a lot of money that they're going to pay. When the executive team understands that and understands it's going to hurt them financially and takes ownership of that risk, then you're going to start seeing change. And we've seen that at a number of organizations where we've gone in and we've partnered with their C-suite, and it's no longer your security guys driving the best practices. It's, listen, if you want to have RDP open to the world for remote access without two-factor, that's great, but here's the risks, and here's how much it's going to cost you when you're breached. There's really nothing else that we can do to do that. Here's a better solution, but you guys take the risk. To date, we've yet to have a company say, once they understand what those risks are, we've yet to have an organization say, yeah, I'm going to go the least secure way. They've always been open to doing it in a more secure fashion, especially with everything that's going on in the news lately.
Risk assessments have been my biggest leveraging tool to use to get people to make financial decisions they normally wouldn't make.
Yeah, exactly. Risk assessments are huge. Okay, so next I'm going to cover threat hunting models, but let's take 5 minutes. Also,
Did I give you the license?
yeah, absolutely.
I gave you the license.
Oh, that, buddy.
Yeah.
You going to talk to him at dinner tonight?
Okay, so let's get started with the
We're
guy.
going, so I want to go. If you're alright.
John came to me and gave me one thing that I don't have on here and I haven't used before. I'm going to plug it because he recommended it. It's called Threat Pinch. It's an OSINT tool.
You said you didn't have it on there. It's right there.
Oh, because I had it.
Oh.
But what it does is it automates your threat intelligence across all feeds. So if you have an Alienvault API key, if you have an Ibm X-Force API key, you can add all of those there. And what it does is, as you're coming across stuff within your browser, you can hover over an IP address and a tooltip appears, and then searches that IP address against all the APIs that you have set it up with. So it's going to make your role or your job a lot quicker and a lot easier by leveraging that tool. So I haven't used it. John's recommended it.
And comparatively, so Alienvault will find something, and it'll actually show you. It'll be red. It'll have a malware, a bug icon, but maybe OSAM has it, so it'll be empty. So that way you can immediately look at it and go straight to where you're going to get some intel off of that particular vector, whether that's a hash value or an IP address. I use it all the time when I'm doing those investigations.
Mm-hmm. And it is available through the Chrome store, so you will need to use Chrome. Okay, so threat hunting models. This is kind of like the meat and potatoes here. I think the security industry still needs practical examples of how to hunt, because it's like this thing that people kind of know what to do, and everyone has their unique way of doing it, but there's no SOP or standard around it. So I've come together with a few common threat hunting techniques that we've leveraged and we've found great success with. So much success that we really haven't made any further ones beyond that, because we're finding so much anomalous activity with these models that we haven't had the time to come up and think about other ones. So the first one is easy. It's just searching. So searching, it's the simplest method of hunting. It's querying data for specific artifacts using a specific search criteria. So there's two things to keep in mind here. Searching too broadly is going to produce way too many results. So for example, I want to see all 443 or SSL traffic across my network. Why? Like, it's just not going to do anything useful. Yeah, I might have some indicators that I could run and see if I'm communicating, to some IOCs, but at the end of the day, it's a way too broad of a search. Searching too specifically might produce too few results and make you think that you're secure when you're actually not. So, for example, you came across an IOC and you're searching a specific port on a specific IOC. That's great. And if it pops, but that might be a little bit too broad. I would either search that specific IOC or search the specific port it's on, because you want to make sure that you're casting that net in a very defined, in a small enough way that you're not going to be overwhelmed, but a large enough way that you're going to capture some stuff. So, like, let's say that, back to my 445 example, let's say that we're searching the IP address that machine's communicating with across 445, but after it makes that initial handshake and goes through, it's now communicating across 443 to that threat actor-owned machine so that it can maintain persistence. We would not catch that if we're searching for an IP address in a specific port. But if we just search that IP address, we'd be able to catch some additional traffic, and it's not broad. It's not broad enough that you're going to be overwhelmed with the amount of data that you're seeing. So searching. The next is clustering. So most of these are math or statistics. Clustering is statistical. It consists of separating groups or clusters of similar data points based on certain characteristics out of a larger set of data. So it's often done using machine learning. My guess is the majority here don't have some type of machine learning backend to automatically do this for them. So hunters use clustering, and I like to use clustering for different applications. Outlier detection, so I like doing both short tail, what I call short tail and long tail analysis. So looking at, let's assume we're looking at a network. Let's look at the least used ports. Let's see the machine which has the smallest amount of bandwidth. And conversely, let's look at the largest used ports and the machine with the most amount of bandwidth. And now we can start drilling down on those and finding anomalous activity. Some practical examples that we found, so that port 445, we found that through that long tail analysis. We looked at the network. We were able to do that long tail analysis over like a 4-week period, and we saw that there were only 4 instances where port 445 was used to go from an internal host to an external host. And it was, when you looked at the graph, it was obvious because it was like way over here on the right and the only one that was sitting over here. So it's outlier detection. Versus we've seen a lot of FTP servers get compromised and then become like that on the other side, where they're sending out so much bandwidth that it's eating up the pipe of the entire organization, because people started sharing out, people hack FTPs and start sharing out movies and stuff. So we've seen them do that before too. So clustering allows you to take a look at your network and at your systems, and then start asking the questions, like, why do we have people using this? Why do we have people using this? You can also use clustering to find like weird SSH connections. So you can drill down, you can do a search for SSH and then cluster based on SSH to see all of the machines across your network that are using SSH. It should only be your IT group or your IT administrators that are leveraging SSH, and hopefully nothing external to internal. If it is, that's going to be a red flag that you've just found without any type of alerting or machine that's helping you. And that's the goal here of what I call advanced threat hunting. Is they're getting through your firewall. Your network intrusion detection sensor is not going to detect it because there's no signature for it. So now you're looking for pure anomaly detection. You're going to start asking those questions, such as, why are people doing X? So grouping, it's similar to clustering, but it's taking multiple unique artifacts and identifying them when they appear together. So I kind of grouped out of my cluster. You have to cluster first before grouping. The big difference between grouping and clustering is that grouping your input is an explicit set of items that are each already of interest. So for example, we just clustered via SSH. Now we're going to group by the 4 non-server machines that we see people using SSH from that don't belong to any of our IT group. And then we can start asking questions. Who are these individuals? Is there any other anomalous or crazy activity coming off their hosts? And then where are they SSHing? Why are they SSHing into those machines? If a group seems out of place, it's potentially represented a tool or TTP that an attacker is using. Let's see. Yeah, so this technique works best when you're hunting for multiple related instances of unique artifacts. So all of SMB on your network, all SSH on your network, and then drilling down into specific systems that are occurring. So you can filter out, and this is one reason, and we'll get into a demo later, but that's one reason I like to use the Elk Stack, so Elastic Log Stash and Grafana, because it allows me to do this incredibly easily and figure out and find those anomalous hits. So stack counting, stacking involves counting the number of occurrences for values of a particular type and analyzing the outliers or extremes. So when you have diverse or large data sets, this gets diminished, like the effectiveness of this type of attack. It's most effective when you're thoughtfully filtering down what you want to see. So, and I have examples, endpoints of a similar function. Right, so organizational unit, all the accounting machines. Let's take a look at all of our accounting machines and let's look at their traffic holistically. Let's stack it, and then let's drill down in on the outliers. They should all have a similar amount of, we'll say, HTTP and HTTPS traffic. They should all have a similar amount of DNS traffic, etc. You're going to be able to see those spikes as they occur. Stacking destination ports, seen in connection with metadata, is also effective. So we have great success doing that, where we're looking for like non-443 and non-80 traffic is the best way to describe it, from internal to external. So you're looking at all external traffic that's not 80 and not 443. If you see anything that's weird, you can investigate it and you will find odd stuff. Most of the stuff that we've come across is benign. It is, someone thinks they're an admin or thinks they're IT savvy, so they opened up RDP at their home and they're RDPing to their home system. Again, I don't care that they're RDPing to their home system. It's just interesting, and it set off a couple of red flags. But you can communicate to that user those risks and let them understand those risks. You'll find stuff like that when doing the stack counting. Stacking across multiple unique hosts with filtered input. So using like threat intelligence feeds, let's say, and this is where Graylog comes in for enriching elastic data, where you can say, okay, let's filter on all the threat intel feeds, all the IOCs that we have, and look at any hosts on our network that are communicating with any of those IOCs. And I say this because although you would think a next-gen firewall would function and alert you and block to that, oftentimes in my experience they are not, or they're misconfigured where they're not actively blocking known malicious IP addresses for whatever reason, context again, and we don't know what the context is. So it's still a great way, stack count analyses is still a great way to find those threat actors on your network. So searching, clustering, grouping, and stack counting is essentially what we do for threat hunting. Are there any questions regarding those techniques?
You familiar with Rita from Black Hills? So it helps you parse through and do some of that clustering and stacking of your like row logs or some certain type of logs.
So what's it called?
Rita.
It's named after John Strand's mom.
How do you spell that?
R-I-T-A.
Google search.
Yeah, it's built in conjunction with, I think, countermeasures, active countermeasures. Their AI Hunter. It's kind of like an open source version of the AI Hunter.
Got you. Okay. You've leveraged it before?
Oh, we put it up in a test environment. We haven't leveraged it, but I just know a lot of people, or a few people that have used that to do like statistical analysis of network traffic and things like that to help pare it down and look for anomalous activities and things from already available network data.
Yeah, so I found it. I'm going to download it and I'm going to play around with it and see if I like it. That's cool. So it is open source. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I'll throw that up as a last slide. And I think I'm giving the slides to you guys too when I'm done, so you guys can share them. Okay. Yes. Yeah. All right. So, what does statistics stuff look like? So I have. Let's compare. So this is an elk stack. I'm leveraging a plugin called Kibbe or a front end called Kibbe instead of Kibana because there's some additional stuff that I was playing with and I was doing. I'll be honest, and no offense to Kibbe, but Kibana does exactly what I need now, so this is just my dev stack that I'm still playing with. But if you want to play with them, you can. So this is essentially a quick dashboard that I've built out for doing the type of statistical analysis that we just talked about. So here I am on what the data that you're seeing is we have a Suricata sensor on a network that's sending everything to our backend, so informational. So it's not just generating alerts, it's sending all the traffic that it's seeing back to our backend so that we can do a little bit deeper of a dive to figure out what's going on our network. So looking at this, we can see that. In fact, let me stop sharing my screen real quick. This is annoying. Now we're good. Sweet. Okay, so this would be a good example of stacking where we have all 443 traffic. All right, now I want to take that away. And now we have DNS traffic. So we have a large amount of DNS traffic. So this is the destination ports. We have a large amount of DNS traffic occurring on this network in the last 15 minutes. So I can click on that, drill into it, and figure out exactly what's going on. So we have, it looks like our router is simply communicating with Google's DNS and I think that's IBM's DNS. Anyone know 9999 off the top of their head? I'm pretty sure that's
Quad 9. Yeah. That's the
threat
Global Cyber Alliance data filter.
Yep. So we have DNS configured with both of these. What we can do further is we're like, all right, we know that 9999 is benign. All right, so let's remove that. Let's filter that value out. And we're stuck with simply Google's DNS. Let's remove Google's DNS and see if we have any anomalous activity in there. So for the last 15 minutes, nope, we don't. We don't have anything. We have no DNS traffic to external IPs that are not the Quad 9 or Google DNS, which is good. Do you see how fast that was? So that very quickly you'd be able to detect something on your network. So let's spread this out and let me look at the last 24 hours and see if there's anything for the last 24 hours. Okay, so over the last 24 hours there was a number of different hits that we had. Actually not that many. It was like,
yeah, but one of them is TCP.
Yep. So let's see what these are. I didn't install that tooltip, by the way, yet, but I'm going to. So I'm just leveraging Alienvault OTX. I'm searching that IP address to see what it is. So there's a couple related pulses, which means that this IP address has appeared on those pulses. Let's look at passive DNS. Findings. All right, it is showing that that is a malicious host. Unfortunately, I don't have a date on that. Passive DNS. Last seen. So this was last seen a while ago, 2016. So this looks like it's simply benign. There's a couple of network intrusion detection hits right here, but we would need to do more investigation on this. So going back to the sensor, my next question is, okay, what is this device? So we would need more data and more data sets to determine what device this is, so that we can make a determination as to whether or not it should be communicating out to this address on TCP. Let's search this other one as well to see what's going on. This is old. This is 341 days ago, so it doesn't look like there's anything on this one. Okay, cool. So this would initiate an investigation to determine what exactly this IP address is on the back end, who it belongs to, and what it's doing. So let's take this a step further. Let's take this IP address and let's see if we can discover any other interesting stuff that it's doing over the last 24 hours. So again, this is just your classic Kibana interface. And I'm searching this IP address over the last 24 hours, so it's going to return essentially everything that I have. And I can start doing counts. So on the left-hand side, I have all of my available fields. Some interesting ones are like DNS. You can add that. We can start looking at what DNS looks like. Stackadapt.com, flashtalking.com. A bunch of ad stuff. I think we have source and desk port. Here we go, desk port. All right, 443, 53, and 80. So nothing too crazy. Let's remove 443. Let's remove 3327, 2522. Okay, let's drill down in on 993. Let's see what it's communicating with. So we have our dest IP address. I'm going to add dest IP address as a field. So we can see that this device is communicating over the last 24 hours. It's communicated 207 times with a small number of IP addresses. So what next? Search these IP addresses? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Or do you think this is benign? Let's draw down the data and see. We are getting geolocations based on this. And it looks like these are Apple. Mail.me.com is the certificate. Yeah, so this might be benign. but you get how fast. So we were able to go from, if I remove everything, we're down to 207 hits. If I remove all of that over the last 24 hours, we have 44,000 hits. So in about 4 clicks, I'm able to drill down, leveraging like those different search methods, and getting a small number of actual items that I can search and determine if something's going on. So going back to the dashboards, the other thing that I like to do is the IP locations. So what this does, this over the last 24 hours, is going to populate a map for me of all the non-US IP addresses that this sensor has detected devices within this network communicating with. So in John's case, because he's a global organization, this might not be as useful, but for those organizations that are just simply US based, it is useful because you can start drilling down and determining what's going on. I'll say a caveat with this is that if you're leveraging Office 365 or Microsoft's cloud, they like to take over IPv4 addresses, and the geolocation databases don't update in a fast fashion, and or Microsoft just doesn't inform them that they took over those IP addresses. So we've seen a large percentage of false positives that we've chased down that end up being, it says we're communicating to, let's say, the Ukraine, but it ends up being that IP address was owned by them, a week, or 2 weeks, or a month ago, but Microsoft now brought it into their cloud, and it's actually a US-based data center that it's communicating with. So keeping that in mind, we've seen that happen with like the United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, France, Germany. Romania is a different one. I don't know that I've ever seen the US or Microsoft take over some Romanian IP addresses to date. So what we can do here, simply click on Romania, and it is going to pull up all of the connections over the last 24 hours that this network has made to this device. So it looks like it's all HTTP traffic. Yeah, it's all HTTP traffic, all TCP, and we can drill down into what that looks like. And so everyone knows, again, you're looking at Suricata alerts. Looks like it timed out. So let's search this IP address. Now, with that new tool that John showed us, I assume I could simply hover over this and it would pull up that threat intel, which is really cool.
Bitdefender is based out of Romania. That's what every time I see Romania, I go, Bitdefender.
Bitdefender is based out of Romania. Yeah, you're right. I bet you it's Bitdefender. Well, let's search anyway and see what it comes up with. Yeah, so those are interesting things that you'll discover too when doing this type of threat hunting. Is you'll be looking for, so you can see that this is Bitdefender's URL. So we now know that someone is trying to be secure on that network. They're running Bitdefender on that endpoint, and that endpoint is simply communicating out with their servers, which are based in Romania. So you'll get interesting intel out of these types of searches, which you wouldn't think that you'd discover. Do you have any other good examples that you find that you found?
Bitdefender sticks out because it's Romania, and it made me laugh because you moused over it and went, "Oh, that's Romania." Who here knew that was actually Romania? You will, yeah, because you see it all the time. Ukraine, Romania, Russia. Obviously, Russia is easy, but
yeah, it's a good
you end up with these little countries. And while we're global, I don't have an office in South America, but I block thousands of logins an hour from Brazil.
Yeah.
I don't have an office in Africa yet, but we block all kinds of traffic from there. So yeah, it's still valid.
So speaking of that, another thing that I found too that I've come across that was interesting. If I remove Romania, you'll look, if you can see it, there's a little blue square right here, and I'm like, who the heck is communicating to me from South America? And I hover over it. It says France, because France still has a colony over there. So it's part of France, that little piece of land. So when you click, it's actually going to drill down into the actual French continent, as well as this, not continent, country, as well as that location, which is cool. But you discover, you discover interesting things that you've come across.
You also find undesignated IP block. associations that don't have country origins because either the country or designation is too small and or not even technically a valid
Designated multi-use.
yeah, on the ICANN or in the IP block space and things like that. And that will get you in 360 in like Microsoft 365 or other geoblocks if you don't block just like all undesignated ranges.
Yep.
So that's just something that you'll see. It's kind of interesting, and they'll change too. So they will get designated sometimes.
Yeah, this is the one. So you'll come across this too. There's a lot of US-based IPs, and this is what set off our Impossible Traveler all the time. When the geolocation services know it's a US-based IP but cannot geolocate exactly where it is, it by default will send you to Wichita, Kansas, which is like the dead center of the US, as you see. So if you do have like an Impossible Traveler dashboard set up and you're seeing a lot of Wichita, Kansas stuff, it's usually false positive. I don't think I've come across any true positives based on that. But yeah, you'll find interesting data like that. I feel bad.
There's a farm in West Virginia that has the same problem.
A farm in West Virginia where it just cheated by default.
Well,
West Virginia.
it's like, we're here to, who are you? Yeah, it happened a lot.
Okay, so the other dashboard we have is the all alerts. So this is the alerting dashboard. So this is more signature based versus like anomaly detection, but at least it gives us a nice holistic view to look up what the alert categories are as well as the signature was that alerted on this network. There's been nothing over the last 4 hours, which is to be expected here because we haven't done anything crazy. Let me search this. I don't think I have any alerts in here. You see, maybe not. But if there were alerts, obviously both the category as well as the signature would show up here. Again, this is more triage-based work, but I still like having, even though I build out advanced threat hunting dashboards, I still like having my alerts in place just so, you'll get fatigued doing a lot of this work, and you just want to go back to something easy essentially, and you can just click through these real quickly, determine if they're true or false positives, and then move on. But then it also gives you more context with what's going on your network, and might give you a little thread that you can pull on. If you see, a certain host on your network start generating a number of alerts, you can pull that host up and you can start looking what else it's doing that's not alert based. So is it communicating to weird IP addresses or weird external ports, etc. The two last dashboards that I like to do is the DNS dashboard. Which are going to show, number one, the source of all the DNS coming from this network. Excuse me. And this network obviously is one single source, so it doesn't look like anything else internally is mixed in. And you're not going to be able to see these. Then it's pushing out, so it's doing a count, so it's doing a stack of all of the all of the DNS names in ascending order. So this is the long tail analysis of the least visited domains on our network. And it's apple.com, various push stuff from Apple, a bunch of stuff, Castle Media, so nothing too crazy or too critical. Scrolling down, these are the descending DNS, so flipping that over, this is the most communicated DNS lookups on our network is php.net. Over the last 15 minutes. Someone at the office. It's weird. That's weird to me, just because I know this network and I know that office, and no one knows PHP and they don't use PHP. So, that's something that we could investigate. Freebsd.org. Someone's doing a lot of open source Intel. Office 365, and a bunch of stuff, a bunch of ad stuff. So again, here we can still drill these out. So if we want to drill down into something, we can click on php.net, and we can see what is communicating with it. Or alternatively, we can drill this out. So we can say, you know what, we do not want to drill down into php.net. Let's remove that and see what else comes up. And now you can see that that stack is completely gone from this dashboard or from this widget, and it's that freebsd.org. But we have another one over here that just popped up because we removed that, Facebook. So someone's connecting to connect.facebook.net. Well, I've seen that one. Okay, so DNS is definitely an interesting data set that you can get access to, and you can find a lot of interesting stuff that's going on within your DNS traffic. The last dashboard that I like to build out based off of Suricata alerts for advanced threat hunting is the file alerts. So we have the file name that was accessed across the network, the file size, and then simply which machines on the network actually did that. So looking at the top one, someone's visiting cgi-ban/count.cgi. You know, that does sound suspicious, so we can drill in on that and take a look. This was 6,700 bytes. And again, it looks like we're stuck with that. You know what? So visibility into your network. So the other thing that you need to have context of and know. This sensor on this network is set up on a tap in between the router and the firewall. So that IP address is the firewall that we're seeing. We're actually not going to see any of the internal traffic, so we're not going to be able to attribute any of this traffic to what the internal machine is on the network to find what it is. So that was a poor setup, to be honest. It should be behind the firewall so that we can see where it's actually, what it's communicating with on the network. And if I'm not mistaken, it's still going to show this external communication. It's not going to show just internal to the firewall. It's going to show internal to that external address. So in this case, there's something strange that is occurring on this network, but we're not able to attribute it to an internal source because of the placement of this sensor. Okay, any questions?
How do you not get sucked into those details?
When you find that out, let me know.
So, it depends on your mission and your time. Knowing now that what this IP address is, that it's their firewall, I'm not even going to bother. I wouldn't even bother searching anything else in here. I would put in a request to move that sensor so internal, so it's inside the network, so that I can then determine priority based on who the user is. To answer that question specifically, if the sensor was set up in the correct place, what I would do is do the investigations based on priority. So, is this someone that has access to the IP address that we're protecting? Is this a CEO or an executive assistant that, if they're breached, there could be reputational damage that occurs to the user, or is this just like a regular user that really doesn't have access to good data? You know, we'll briefly look and see if there's any lateral movement off that host, but then move on.
Yeah, this one's a little, but the page prior where we talked about the PHP and nobody should be using PHP and digging into that rabbit hole in the middle of something else, or honestly, you could spend days just digging into that kind of data.
Yeah. So, and that's the other thing. It's how open your organization is to closing vulnerabilities or switching gears. So we work with a lot of orgs that we are just starting to do like application security scanning, because up to this point they haven't been doing anything. Yes, we find like a bunch of, let's say, SQLi, but to breach that or to actually exploit those vulnerabilities, you have to be inside their network to do it. It's not actually occurring from their website. So although it's on our list of, hey, you need to stop this, we have some control in place, so we'll put some additional monitoring around that, and then they can come back to it and do it. But you're right. Like if they're using PHP, it's just that shift in their mindset of doing it in a more secure fashion so that the code can be more protected, back to like understanding risks. If they understand what those risks were, they'll be more open to change. But these types of tools allow you to provide not only the they allow you to provide what their exposure actually is, and then if you can effectively communicate what that risk is, now you have risk plus exposure, and stuff's going to change if you're partnered at the right level. Yeah, we've hit our heads against the wall a number of times when we've only partnered with like the local IT group, because we like working with the local IT group, but unfortunately at the end of the day, they're not like sales, they're not driving business, they're a cost center, they're not bringing in massive amounts of revenue, so no one ever listens to them. So we've stopped partnering. We assist local IT, but we've started partnering with like the owners, the executive team, etc. It's more of a pain in the butt, but stuff actually gets done. Like we've been able to affect change at organizations doing simple analyses like these. Like we will literally go in, we'll throw one of these Raspberry Pi sensors on the network, let it run for 3 weeks, find a bunch of crap on their network, display these same dashboards to them essentially, show them and tell them what it is and what's occurring on their network, and then their eyes are opened. And I hate to use those types of scare techniques when we go into an organization, but it is scary, and they need to understand what those risks are so that they can better make a decision for their business and for their org. All right, so the last thing I have is the Suricata sensor. So, go back to my slides. Ah, come on. Okay, so I have a bunch of other OSINT tools that I didn't cover before because I didn't want to overwhelm you with the open source stuff. But now that you've kind of seen the F3EA framework, you've seen certain statistical models that we can use for threat hunting, and you've seen what that looks like within like a Kibana interface, here's some other tooling that you can use. So Critical Stack provides free intel marketplace, sources, feeds, blacklists. It's updated very regularly, and it includes an option for you to submit your own threat intel, and that's intel.criticalstack.com. And these are fun people that I've come across that have been doing stuff on the internet. So Kieran Bandla, has anyone worked with her or heard of her before? She runs a GitHub page where she's compiled a list of all APTs released by various vendors and put it in one location. It's meant to be a repository of publicly available papers and blogs related to malicious campaigns, activity software, etc. It's great reading though. So you can go through, you can read a lot of the recent stuff that's in there, and you can understand what these APT groups are leveraging and using, what tools they're using. Because although, again, I doubt that you're going to be directly targeted by APTs, once that information's out there, you see a lot of criminal orgs and a lot of script kiddies start leveraging those same tool sets and those same techniques. So you can build out stuff within your systems to better protect and detect what's going on. And that's github.com/aptnotes/data. Internet Storm Center. So I'm sure everyone's heard of them. It just as an aggregated list of suspicious domains, weighted by tracking malware from several sources. And everything is categorized as low, medium, or high, and that's just isc.sans.edu/suspicious_domains.html. Brad at Malware Traffic. Does anyone know Brad from Malware Traffic or come across this stuff before? So, malware-traffic-analysis.net. I think his site's still up. He, in the past, published a regular blog on malware and exploit kit traffic. He used to update it daily. I haven't been to his site in a little bit, so I think it's still up. But the intel on his site is good, and because he publishes those exploit kits, you're able to download, and if you want to reverse or do stuff with it, you can do your own investigation, you can reverse your stuff, and you can extract those indicators on your own. If you do that, make sure you have a lab set up that is not connected to the internet. Threat Miner is a site that enables the user to conduct data mining for indicators of compromise. It's crowd supported. It can be used to supplement your search operations across domains. And John, I'm wondering if we can submit that to your Google plugin guide, because maybe these are other orgs that he can start, leveraging, so it makes it easier for that. So I'm probably after this going to reach out to him, send him the slide deck, and say, can we integrate with these other services? it easy for everybody. So it's threatminer.org. Again, domains, IPs, SSL, and a wide variety of other indicator types that you can leverage. ThreatCrowd is another one. It's basically a search engine for artifacts related to threats. It has a nice, pretty graph interface, which I think is really cool, and it makes it easy to see relations between different artifacts. So the creator maintains a blog too that's updated semi-regularly, but I love graph analysis. You can do some really cool stuff with graph analysis, and this site does that for you. All right, so the last piece here is Suricata sensor. So I wanted to kind of go through what we do from a budgetary perspective.
Just a note on that, it does already integrate with ThreatMiner and both ThreatCrowd as well as like 15 other.
Perfect.
20,
awesome.
Probably more.
Awesome.
So
that's that, what's it called? ThreatPinch. Yeah, so ThreatPinch integrates with all that stuff already. I'm glad someone made a tool for that. Yeah. So keep it, but use that ThreatPinch, because that ThreatPinch is going to be a phenomenal tool moving forward.
it does the IBM X-Force as well.
Okay, awesome. If you're using Chrome.
Correct. Or if you went to, what was the first one on up there? No. Browsingly. You could install extensions in it.
Possibly. I think if you pay for the service, yeah, you probably can. All right. So the last thing I wanted to cover is, let me show my screen out here, the Suricata sensor. Essentially, this is what we do. We leverage Raspbian OS for building out those Suricata sensors, and you can buy. We actually buy just the prepackaged sensors off of Amazon, essentially, that come with the SD card with Raspbian already installed on it. So we plug that in, get that up and operational, update it, so it's at the latest version, and then we're simply running these tools or these commands on it. So let me start from the current slide, which is installing Suricata from Aptitude. Then we're using pip. We're using pip to install Suricata update. You're going to run into a problem because this PyYAML library is not installed by default through pip, which is going to make Suricata update screen. So you need to install YAML, and then I think you have to go back through and install Suricata update again. Or I think it works. I don't recall. Once you have that installed, you can use Suricata update to list enabled sources. It's going to print out a list of what those enabled sources are, and then you can go through and enable each source. And I'm going to show you what that looks like with the sensor that we have running right now. Did everyone get a chance to get a picture of those? Yep.
How does that all come back to the world view? I mean, when you get that back to your gray log, I mean, I'm assuming you're sending that in the gray log to Lana.
Yep, I'll show you. So, So the first thing we want to do with Suricata update is list the enabled sources, or list the enabled sources. So the command is Suricata update space list dash enabled dash sources, and you're going to see that nothing was enabled. I have a mechanical keyboard. I'm not used to these laptop keyboards. So we currently have no enabled sources. So the next thing we want to do is then list out all of the sources so we can see what those sources are, and that's simply Suricata update dash list sources. And here's all the sources that we have. saw before. One of the commands that I did see, by the way, was, oops, this again. Someone had asked if you're able to add your own sources. One of the commands is add source. So it does look like you can add your own sources to this list to leverage. So the next thing we want to do is we want to enable a source. So we're going to do Suricata update. The command is enable source, and then the name of that source. And because this guy is here, I'm going to enable him. It is enabled by name. And I think I need to be admin to do that. Okay, so it says we're already enabled. So let's try to enable another source. Let's do the emerging threats open feed. This is done by a proof point. For those of you that don't know, I had mentioned Wombat earlier for your security training, and Wombat was recently purchased by a proof point. So they are one company now. Okay, so it says it's already enabled. So those sources are already enabled, and then to run the update, you simply run Suricata update. And essentially goes through and checks each of those sites, loads the rules, and then updates your configuration with the latest rule sets, disable rules, so you don't have to worry about that. You're essentially just piping all of that data in, and it's storing it in one file on that Linux machine, versus by default, if you're familiar with Suricata, it stores rules in like a DNS rule config or a HTTP rule config, and each of those are in different files. This just puts them all in one location, in one file, so it makes it easier for running. So it's giving me a couple warnings, which I am just going to ignore. I'm ignoring these because it's essentially I don't have domain controller servers set as a variable in this configuration file, and it's angry because I don't have those set, which I don't care about. So this just came through and it disabled 18 rules, it enabled 41 rules for Flowbit dependencies, and it's writing the rules out to that location. It added 11 rules, and we have 22,287 rules enabled. It goes through and does a test of the rule sets that were recently enabled. If it doesn't pass this test, it goes back through and undoes all of the changes that it did do. And you can ignore that error. I just don't have the threshold config set. It should finish here momentarily, and that was how easy it was to update this. Taking that a step further, I just run this as a cron job on the machine. Okay, here we go. So it errored out because the slow Raspberry Pi is out of memory, and it's restoring the previous rule files. So you'll come across that as well, leveraging these Pis. The problem is I have Suricata running on this machine right now, or on this Pi right now, and I can't run Suricata update and the actual Suricata at the same time. So there are restrictions for doing stuff on the cheap. So to answer the question of, all right, well, we got this, how do we get this data to where we need to get this data to? What we did is we installed Logstash on this Pi because we use the Elk stack, and we just configured the Logstash service to send that data to our backend. So what that looks like is this.
Do you use that versus like AnixLog or?
So we use everything. It just depends completely on the situation. For these Raspberries,
was it easier to configure that than AnixLog?
Yes,
really?
it was.
Interesting.
Yeah, for us it was easier. To each their own. But we've leveraged AnixLog. We've leveraged a bunch of other tooling for getting that log data to the same backend. As long as we can normalize it in our backend, it's going to give us the data that we need.
Yeah.
So we try to be as vendor agnostic as possible, so that if an organization wants to pay for stuff, or if they want something that's a little bit more robust on their network detecting all of these items, we're able to go through and fulfill those needs and fulfill that need. But yeah, so what that looks like is the Logstash configs, and let's see, Logstash copy, yes. So you'll see this this config file. This is all it is. So we installed Logstash, created this config file where we're piping out our suricata to this eve.json file. So suricata is essentially writing all of the traffic to this eve.json file, and that's what our Logstash file is looking for. We're doing everything which is info level and above. We're also geolocating the IP addresses based on this geolite city data, geolite city, and then shipping that off to actually my house right now. That's where this thing's running from. So I'm not going to put my IP address up there.
What?
That's for you guys.
Lucky in your phone number when you said that about some knock on wood. I was like, if I can text him right now.
But yeah, so that's how we ended up setting up Logstash. Now, go on. Yeah, back to NXLog. We never thought about it, to be honest with you. So we've leveraged NXLog in the past, but for this specific tool, we were called in for an incident where we had to come in and they needed someone there like within 4 hours, and we wanted to throw monitoring on their network so we could figure out, just to make sure while we're there, if anything else is going on. So this was the fastest way that we could come up with something and get something piped back to our center. So like this is just my demo stuff. In production, we're putting stuff into like AWS, which is a little bit more secure than my basement.
Have you considered using Salt, Puppet, something like that to maintain? I mean, obviously these are going to start to grow across your network.
Yes.
You're going to want to make sure that you're consistent.
Yes.
Is the Pi robust enough to manage all of these, like, run a Puppet service and manage the Suricata service and the log?
That we don't know, so we're currently testing that to see if Puppet's going to be able to give us that capability. I don't know. I mean, you saw what happened when we were running Suricata and we ran Suricata Update, but it's just, we might be able to make them a little bit more robust, or it might be just a cheap solution, and if we need to do this on a larger scale, we're going to have to start charging more for these things to go through. So like from us, when we come in and an organization wants this, I think we charge them $50 for the hardware and everything to complete this. And then
Pi 0?
Yeah. I think this was a Pi 3, I think.
We've played with these and through concepts and used like Testable, Ansible, and Puppet, because what we found out is the SD cards will actually eventually, because of the rewrites and everything going through, they're not enterprise grade like like an actual full-on SAN or something like that. So we'll have to have IT support replace them, and then we wanted to push back down the config automatically.
That's cool.
And stuff like that. But there are issues with that. We tried to even get like a custom Bro instance to be able to compile and things like that.
Yeah, I doubt Bro would run on them.
No, we've tried everything. And we actually ended up going to, because it's all proof of concept in our area, we ended up just doing just Snort, just because even Suricata with some of the management stuff, and having 2 NICs on it, so to have a management and an actual intake. So we've had to do USB, and we try to look at other things, like you mentioned, Tinkerbox. We looked at other low platform, lightweight systems, and we even tested just like we're in HP shops with HP minis, like they're like almost like the new little HP mini boxes. We'll throw them on because we like that we could. Other than those boxes, the Raspberry Pi, also they have PoE injectors. So you could throw them right into a data closet with a PoE injector. You don't need any power or anything. You just need a network cable. It gets all powered through that. So it's kind of nice.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up about the dual NICs. because that's the one thing we've run into is with the PIs that we have, they only have one NIC, so we have to enable the Wi-Fi, we have to connect it to the local Wi-Fi network, and then we have to disable the power saving on the Wi-Fi because it turned, even though it's constantly sending data, for some reason it just turned itself off, so we have to disable the power saving. So yeah, there's tricks, and I'm sure there's better ways of doing this, but there's not better ways that I found that are as cheap as this that give us the visibility that we need, at least at the network level. Okay, so I know that's a little early. The class is supposed to go to 6, but that's roughly all the material I have. Does anyone have any questions regarding what we covered or anything specific to like my background and what we've seen? Awesome. So you guys have an hour back. Thank you guys very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.